Hey, how's it going there, folks? Welcome back here to a Sunday. It is the Earthmaster here on this end, about 11:36 a.m. here, March 24th, 2024. Latest activity here on the Earthquake 3D globe. Looks like a 1.7 there into the Alaska region. We'll check out this earthquake activity here in just a few minutes. Covering the space weather activity, we did get the arrival of this massive expected CME a little bit earlier than forecasted. So it looks like overnight here, or at least overnight in the unlit side of the Earth, across areas of Europe, Russia area, seeing a G4 class storm. So the timing was perfect for these guys to see this Aurora activity. Had this been, of course, across the North American region, we'd be looking at some very low areas across the middle latitudes here of seeing the auroras. So we'll have to watch for that tonight, see if conditions prevail throughout the evening. The current status, though, shows a decline. This is the current updated status. Let me double check here and see if I got that right. Here's the current one for the northern section here of this planet and the southern section as well. Notice that things are kind of tapering off here. Not quite as intense, but again, we did see G4 class storming conditions, and a lot of folks wondering, well, what is that? What's G4? G4 is the strength of the geomagnetic storm, as far as that CME power goes, the effects here on the Earth's magnetic field. We reached up there to the G4. I think that reached up to about a KP index of 8 or so. That's pretty impressive. And some potential issues could arise from a G4 class storm, possible widespread voltage control problems on the power grid. Now, normally, before this takes place, the operators and the technicians and whatnot at these power grids make some minor adjustments to just double check all the safety systems, make sure they're not going to pop or reset. So that's always could be an issue, but for the most part, there's some safety features in place to prevent that from happening. HF radio, obviously some satellite navigation degrade for hours, low frequency radio navigation systems as well. Auroras may be seen as low as Alabama and Northern California. Gosh darn it. Had this been last night, I'd be up all night looking for the auroras, and it's possible we could have seen them there with a G4 class storm, and the way that BT-BZ component of the interplanetary magnetic field was pointed south. Didn't quite reach up to G5. That's possible. We just have to watch for that. Auroras may be seen as low as Florida and southern Texas. All right. So again, back to the current outlook. It does look like we're stabilizing a little bit. Let me explain why. This is the current solar wind, real-time solar wind. Here's when the CME hit there earlier today, excuse me. And this right here is the BZ-BT component. A lot of times when we see this happen here, a southward tilt, that allows solar wind stream to flow right in and amplify those auroras that we've seen there, a few hours ago. And they were mostly, again, on the when everyone's sleeping over there across Europe, Russia area, all those areas seeing some decent auroras out there. Now, we've noticed here, even with the density elevated and the speed, which, by the way, was really impressive. We had speed up there around almost 900 km a second, so that's pretty fast. But this was a massive CME that was produced here a couple days ago from that X-flare. So it arrived earlier than expected, faster than expected. The density is pretty thick as well, so it was the perfect environment here for a pretty decent solar storm, just a little bit sooner than forecasted. But unfortunately, we're stabilizing here. We're getting a more northward tilt here of both of these lines, indicating that even with everything being elevated still, the Earth's magnetic field is brushing off all of this solar wind, so we're not going to be seeing as much auroras as what we had seen earlier today. And that's unfortunate because we still have some decent density right here. This is the density, and the speed is still elevated here, up above. Looks like it's still around 800 km per second or so. And the temperatures dropped off. So it does look like the majority of that CME has passed us, but still lingering conditions persist here. We'll just have to watch and see if we get a more southward tilt here of the BZ-BT component and hope for the best. Maybe we'll see some auroras later tonight, but as long as that's stabilized, we probably won't. Now the forecast here, this is tonight's forecast, but this is based on their original forecast of the arrival of the CME that was supposed to come tonight. So we're like way early. There still could be some effects again, so we'll cover that maybe a little bit later on this evening. But this was their original forecast showing the KP index around 6 or so. And I think they were forecasting a G2 or G3 class storm. But 24-hour observed maximums, there you go, that G4 that kicked up. KP index up there around the 8 level, I believe. Let me see here what we had for the arrival of that. Yeah, we were up around 8. See this scale right here? There's that purple line indicating that G4 class storm. Yeah, we reached out around 8 there, very close to the 9. Not often do we see something like this. This reading here, this station picked up around 9, KP index of 9. But these other stations here roughly around 8. Either way, it was a pretty nice storm while it lasted. Unfortunately for us here on the North American side, it didn't, no effect. Obviously, we had daylight out here, so we're not going to see those auroras with the sun and the position that we were in. It's unfortunate. But again, hopefully things will maybe continue throughout the evening. Unsettled conditions, but I think as long as that BT-BZ component stays northward, we're going to be looking at just very minimal conditions out there. Things are stabilizing. But what a storm, right? There it is. That's the G4 storm, KP index of 8, and all of this taking place about the same time as we're dealing with a Proton event. It still looks quite elevated here. This was put out today, 3:24 at 18:38 UTC time. Current UTC time is 18:44, so just a couple minutes behind here. But notice the polar regions here still seeing quite a bit of proton density effects here. And that's been going on here ever since the X flare popped off a couple days ago. So that is continuing. This could continue for a couple days. So we'll have to watch that. Again, these are going to be radio blackouts being observed across these polar regions. It does look like portions here, Alaska. This is a very thick line here of the radio blackout. Most of the time, if you see an X flare or something like that, it'll be centered over one circle area, like a like how it is now, but with a red color. The proton events affect generally the areas around the polar regions, north and south, and we're still seeing it here for 2 days now, consistent. But that's very low on the into the North American plate here. So radio blackouts being observed up there, I'm sure, up into Canada, Greenland, Iceland area, Alaska up in there as well. That's crazy. And those do affect the high frequency, low frequency navigation systems, high frequency communication systems such as shortwave radio, CB radio, ham radio, and stuff like that could experience some radio blackouts. So what do we have right now for flaring activity? Obviously, we felt the effects of the CME, that large CME that we are expecting. Again, forecasted for tonight, but arrived much sooner. As far as flaring goes, well, today looks like we're still sizzling a little bit. Not quite as much as yesterday. Yesterday, we've seen about almost, wanting to say 18 M flares or so across the board. There's the X flare from one of the sunspots. That one sunspot was 3614. We'll look at the magnetic structure here in a little bit. But all these M flares came off of 3615. And as you can see, There's you got to count every single one of these spikes on the line. That's an M flare. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, maybe 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. It looks like 22 M flares here in the last couple days. That is crazy. So overnight, or at least this morning so far, we're mellowing out here into the C flare category, but we're still looking at the potential of seeing some further strong flaring out here. It's that hasn't depleted yet. We're still looking at a good, decent 45% chance for an X flare. That's quite elevated. M flares are almost certain because we're sizzling with M flares right now, and C flares a guarantee. Proton event continuing through the day today with a 99% certainty. That's just been ongoing here for 2 days now. Looking at the magnetogram image, which shows the complexity of these sunspots, 3615 right here is the source of mini M flares, those flares that we just counted. Now, looking at this today, still looks quite complex. Let's see how it looks compared to yesterday. Looks about the same. So really not seeing any major change here with this massive sunspot. It is very complex. Got a beta gamma delta class structure. Here is the visible disk, a massive region. I really don't see any deterioration going on or degrading going on with this sunspot. So we'll still have to watch that. This isn't the one that produced the X flare. 3614 up here is the X flare producer, but this one has produced, like I said, 21 M flares in the last couple days here. So we'll continue to watch that for some flare threats. Now that is the main region here that harbors that potential for X flare activity. 3615, beta gamma delta. There's a 30% chance. It looks like AR 3614, the source of the recent X flare, does have a chance of seeing another X flare as well. If you guys remember, this is an old sunspot, 3590, that was here weeks ago, and it gave us the largest X flare of solar cycle 25. But it came back around for another visit. It did give us a massive CME. This is the source of where that CME activity came from. It doesn't look like much, but it does harbor some central core complexity. It's a massive region in general. But, yeah, this is the one that blasted off the CME recently. The effects that were felt across Russia and Europe area, Asia, last night, our morning time, was due to that X flare eruption, that massive CME that blasted off. So still watching this one, even though this one's produced many M flares. The activity on the board here looks like they are just impulsive. There's really no explosive CME associated with any of these M flares that I can see. There's the X flare. Notice this is drawn out, a thickness right here in the line in between the graphs, indicating a long duration event, and of course that CME that blasted off there. There's a looks like a little prominence eruption that blasted off the southwestern limb of the sun here recently. You can see it on this image. So the sun's definitely still active. These sunspots are starting to drift, slightly over here towards the western limb. They're still in position here where they'll be geo-effective, but here after a couple days they'll be further off on the western limb and won't quite be squarely lined up as they are right now, as far as the facing the Earth. These sunspots behind them, well, I got my eyes here maybe on this region over here for some potential rapid development. It is unnamed currently, but we'll continue to watch that region. It does look quite active, but overall threat right now, folks, is pretty elevated in terms of the potential for flaring. And we'll watch tonight. Hopefully things will remain unsettled. We'll get the BT-BZ component pointing south again. That should allow some solar wind to flow in and hopefully amplify some aurora conditions here for us on the North American side of the Earth here, hopefully. Kevin put out a nice little shot here of when the arrival of that CME kicked up. Notice the BT-BZ component open, pointed south here. That lined up with the arrival of the CME at 800 kms a second. There's that temperature, density, plasma density. That all lined up to create these G4 class storming conditions that we've seen there in the other side of the world, Russia and Asia and Europe area. They got, I'm sure, quite a show. All right, so with the arrival of this CME, have we seen any major earthquake activity similar to what we've seen yesterday? Remember, we've seen, we had that X flare, and then we got a pretty decent Proton event come in. Shortly thereafter, we've seen a large earthquake take place out here, and that was over around the Papua New Guinea area. This was right about the time here, a couple hours into it, after the elevated protons hit the planet, we've seen this 6.9 earthquake hit. Now, a couple other earthquakes came in after that as well. Looks like we had a 5.7 and whatnot. But far as today goes, with the arrival of that CME, and this was the side of the planet that was facing the sun when that CME, or facing the direct CME. I'm not seeing anything elevated out here in terms of elevated earthquake activity in this region of the world. It looks quite normal. 2s and 3s out here across the area. That's on any given day. No large earthquake activity out there in that region. Far as today's activity, looks like we did have a little bit of movement south or southeast of our 6.9 from yesterday. It's going to be a 5.1 in our quiet zone. This is around the Fiji area, well north of Fiji, it looks like here. Very shallow earthquake, some surface adjustment going on here. If we look at the last 7 days, it's been generally quiet here, roughly about Solomon Islands now eastward along this plate boundary. There was a couple smaller quakes here, but if you look at these 3 quakes, or these couple quakes, they're relatively deep in this area with no surface adjustment going on upstream here. So we'll continue to watch this area. This has been pretty quiet here for over a week. But far as anything major going on with the arrival of the CME, I'm not seeing it yet. I said the same thing yesterday, right before the, right about the time the X flare hit and the Proton events hit there in the planet, that there was no relation, right? It almost seemed like there was no relation in earthquake activity and space weather activity, but that kicked back up a couple hours, and that's when we seen that 6.9 come into the Papua New Guinea area. We'll watch this today because it doesn't seem like it's instant. It does seem like it takes a few hours or something for the activity to stir things up along the plate boundaries. So we'll continue to watch that, see how today's earthquake activity plays out with the arrival of that powerful CME. Again, that was 850, almost 900 kilometers a second plasma cloud that hit the planet. Right now, no signs of any elevated earthquake activity, but we'll watch it today. All right, covering movement across the west coast, Southern California. A handful of smaller quakes here in the Ocotella Wells area. This has been kind of an ongoing deal here for a couple days, with about 12 earthquakes or so. Nothing big. It looks like the largest was a 2.1. Relatively shallow, though, in this area. That is just off of the, looks like a section of the San Jacinto Fault Zone. One earthquake here on the Brawley seismic zone here, 1.4 earlier this morning. Thought I felt a spider crawling on me. But aside from that, the southern branch of the San Andreas Fault, it looks pretty quiet out here today. Aside from just a little bit of movement down south here. Look at that. Not a whole lot going on across this area, and that's a little strange. Normally we'll see some type of activity out here, but really not a whole lot going on across this region today. Further up north into Northern California, as you can see, a handful of smaller quakes, but looking at the states, really nothing major going on out here. One little lonesome earthquake out in the Elgin, South Carolina area. They see earthquake activity from time to time. And just a little small microquake. No major elevated activity there across the South America region for now. A lot of these some older quakes, but even though it looks like there's a lot, these are mostly 2s and 3s. And of course, along a major subduction zone here, that's pretty common. Looks like we did have some activity into the Gulf of California with a 4.0 coming in earlier this morning. But let's see here. New Zealand, anything going on down here? Looks like some older deep activity from last night. Really nothing new, but we'll continue to watch this area as well. There's our newer quake activity around Fiji. Clustering going on yesterday. Again, that was associated with all this Proton event kicking up. Really not a whole lot of migration here across the area. Looks like maybe some deeper movement here with a 4.6 fairly recent. That is along the plate boundary here. A lot of times we'll see that migration of pressure transfer all across this line, and it will actually be visible. You'll see large quakes here like we did yesterday. Following that 6.9, about an hour or so later, a couple hours later, we've seen that 5.7 stir up here across the Java Trench. So we're slowly working our way across this plate boundary with the most recent there, a 4.6, fairly deep, about 115 kilometers there into the Java Trench. And as I mentioned over here, roughly about the same activity as we would see on any given day. Iceland, let's see what's going on up in Iceland here real quick as far as earthquake activity goes. Looks a little bit more elevated out here across the region today. A little separate swarming going on up north. As far as the live stream goes, let's go check this out real quick and see what we got. I'm sure they're still continuing the eruption out there, which is day number 9. Day number 8 or day number 9 here of the ongoing eruption across Iceland. And as you can see, it's still free-flowing. Magma just freely finding its way from the deeper regions up to the surface. This is definitely a long-duration event, I feel. Something major has changed from the last eruption there to the most current eruption that we're seeing right now. And I think this could continue for quite a while. With the stacking of lava being observed. Let's see what we got for any new updates. It is the weekend here, so most of the time, unless something major changes, they won't put out an update. So this is from yesterday. Nothing new to report. Hopefully Monday we'll get a new update, maybe a map in terms of the accumulation of this lava flow. This is the older map here. Shows where the vents are. Roughly about here, and some stacking going on of the lava, right? We're just getting this continual free flow of magma from below to the surface. That's just continuing to amplify the thickness here of the lava flow. It's just kind of building up upon itself, making some new mountains out here probably. Eventually, it may find its way and divert off of that main lava flow and continue to go down south. But right now, there's no further south advancement, at least according to this map. Nothing major going on here across Hawaii for now. Don't see anything in the last hour. Mostly smaller microquakes out there today. So we will definitely keep an eye here on the space weather, folks. Yeah, Kevin added it up here. It looks like KP index of 8, but that's that was earlier. Now things are just a little bit, a little bit calmer, but we'll continue to watch it for the North American folks here. Looks like Iceland, Greenland will be getting some auroras here tonight. It's just starting to get dark out there across the Iceland area, but we'll keep an eye on it, see if we can't get that real-time solar wind stream here to, well, at least the BTBZ component. Or actually, it looks like we're getting a little separation here between these two lines. If that continues, it's still pointing north. Notice this is well above this 0 line. That's what fairly much stabilizes the, or prevents the auroras from happening, even with this elevated activity. But we'll continue to watch it. Hopefully things come back to where we can see a little bit of that aurora activity in the North American North American plate here, North American continent. All right, folks. I am out of here. There is that looks like that southwestern limb down here. Remember I showed you guys about a prominence eruption? That looks like that's part of it from earlier. There's all the protons. You guys see that? Watch this model up here. This is all from, and they're still just streaming at us. That's why we're seeing this elevated proton event. You can see them on here as well. It looks like little speckles. Well, that is from that X flare that popped off a couple days ago. Right about, there was a big X flare right there. Notice all these little sparkles showering us with all these charged protons. And that's why that map looks like this right here, because we're just getting hammered with those charged protons from the sun, continuing for a little while. And it's a dandy of a one. We'll continue to watch for some earthquake activity, though, with all this space weather events going on. I guess just be prepared. We'll see where things tend to stir up here today. We'll definitely keep an eye on the plate tectonics at hand. I got some school stuff I got to do before Monday. Spring break is over for me anyway, so I'll have to get busy and get some school stuff going. We'll catch you guys back here later tonight unless something major happens. A real quick glance at the Storm Prediction Center for severe weather. Looks like portions of Kansas and Oklahoma seeing a 5% chance for tornado probability today. There is a broad area of 2% possibility, so if you're out there in these regions, heads up. Some rain obviously some rain, some wind, and some hail threats out there as well. So just stay weather aware if you're out in these regions today. Enid, Oklahoma, Dodge City, Kansas. Heads up. All right, folks, we'll catch you guys back out here a little bit later on. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.